Good morning, students. Welcome back to our Google Classroom classes. Hope everybody is fine. Stay safe at home and take care. All of you must watch the previous video regarding COVID awareness. Let us begin the session. Already we are completed 3 chapters in the month of April and May. The cell, tissues and the flower. Question answers of this chapter's revision questions, test paper 1, 2 and 3 and its solutions are also given. Hope everybody has completed all these works. Copy down everything in your register systematically. Today we are going to start with chapter 5, Pollination and Fertilization. Continuation of chapter Flower. In this chapter, we will study what is pollination, types of pollination, self-pollination and different types of self-pollination, cross-pollination, advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination, agents of pollination, characteristics of flowers for various types of pollination with examples, fertilization in flowers, double fertilization and triple fusion are the topics. What is pollination? Pollination is the process of transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of a flower. Anther, male part of the flower, part of a stamen, and stigma, female part of a flower, part of pistil. In the previous chapter, the flower, you have studied that the pollen grains contain male gametes. The anthers of a stamen produce powdery material called pollen grains. For the formation of fruits and seeds, the pollen grains must reach the stigma. Pollination helps in the production of fruits and seeds. Pollination happens in 3 different ways: autogamy, geitonogamy, and allogamy. Autogamy and geitonogamy are the divisions of self-pollination, and cross-pollination is also called allogamy or xenogamy. Autogamy and geitonogamy are 2 types of self-pollination. What is autogamy? Auto means self, gamy means marriage. In case of a bisexual flower, pollen grains are transferring from anther to stigma of the same flower. In this hibiscus flower, both male and female gametes are present in the same flower. So the process of pollination which is taking place in this flower, bisexual flower, that is autogamy. Another bisexual flower, the pollen comes loose from stamens and a pistil of the same flower collect that pollen. Another type of self-pollination, that is geitonogamy. Geitino means neighbor. In this, the transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to stigma of another flower of the same plant. In this plant, here in this picture, there are many flowers on the same plant. 1, 2, 3, 4 flowers, 5 flowers are there. Sometimes the pollen grains are transferring from one rose flower to another rose flower of the same plant. That is called geitonogamy. How are flowers adapted for self-pollination? The anther and stigma mature at the same time. That is one adaptation. Another adaptation, some bisexual flowers closed all their life, they do not open at all, so that the pollen can easily pollinate the stigma of that flower. This is the diagrammatic representation of autogamy. The pollen grains are transferring from anther to stigma of the same flower. And this is the diagrammatic representation of geitonogamy. A plant with two flowers transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of another flower of the same plant. Now, what are the advantages of self-pollination? Importance of self-pollination. First one, it is a sure and economical method because stamens and carpel mature at the same time. Second, parental characters are preserved. Third, small quantity of pollen is sufficient. Fourth, flowers need not be large or showy. Fifth one, need not produce nectar or scent. These are the advantages of self-pollination. And disadvantages of self-pollination are: as self-pollination occurs regularly generation after generation, it leads to loss of vigor and vitality of the plant variety. Repeated self-pollination produce poor quality seeds that produce weak offsprings. The genetic defects of the plant variety cannot be eliminated. New varieties cannot be obtained by self-pollination. This is because no intermixing of the genetic makeup of different plant varieties occurs, and the same genetic traits are passed on to the next generation. So these are the disadvantages of self-pollination. And these advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination are given in your book. Learn all these points. Next is that cross-pollination. Cross-pollination is also called allogamy or xenogamy. The transfer of pollen grains from anther of a flower of one plant to stigma of flower of another plant of the same species. That is called allogamy. And in this garden, you can see many plants of same species are growing. Pollinating agents helps in transfer of pollen grain from one flower to another flower of the same species. That is why cross-pollination is taking place in such type of flowers. And this is the diagram that which demonstrate cross-pollination. Transfer of pollen grains from one flower to another flower of another plant of the same species with the help of some pollinating agents. What are the advantages of cross-pollination? Advantages are new varieties can be produced. Cross-pollination is a source of variation in offspring because of intermixing of genetic makeup of two plants. Second, seeds produced are healthier and have better germinating capacity. Third, enhances adaptability of the offspring to change in the environment. And disadvantages: pollination is uncertain because plants have to depend on external agencies for pollination, which may or may not be available at the right time. The pollen grains have to be produced in larger amount to ensure there is availability for pollination. A lot of pollen grains are wasted in this way. The process is not economical because the flowers have to adapt themselves to attract pollinating agents. This means that they have to be large, showy, colorful, centered, and produce nectar. Sometimes cross-pollination may lead to poor quality seeds because of mixing or some feeble genotype of one or both the parent plants. So these are the disadvantages. Different types of flowers but belongs to the same species. The next difference between self-pollination and cross-pollination. This differentiation is based on characteristics like occurrence, agents of pollination, production of pollen grains, appearance of flowers, fragrance and nectar, nature of offsprings produced. Based on this, self-pollination and cross-pollination. With this much explanation, we reached at the end of this topic, pollination. The summary: we started with the pollination, definition of pollination, types of pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination is of two different types, allogamy and heterogamy. Self-pollination is of two different types, autogamy and heterogamy. Cross-pollination is also called allogamy or xenogamy. Advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination and cross-pollination, and comparison of self-pollination and cross-pollination. Read this chapter thoroughly. We will continue this chapter in the next class. At the end of this topic, a homework is given to you. Observe carefully and identify different types of pollinations. Thank you. Another flower, and this flower is also a bisexual flower. Here you can see this is the female part of the flower, stigma and style, and These are the pollen grains, and pollen grains during pollination time, the pollen grains are transferring from anther to stigma of the same flower, that is called autogamy. And more than one flowers are here in this plant, and during pollination time the pollen grains are transferring from one flower to another flower, that is one flower to another flower of the same plant, that is called geitonogamy. And the third type of pollination, that is allogamy. Allogamy means transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of a flower of another plant of the same species, that is called allogamy.